Good morning, everyone. I am pleased to welcome you here at the University of Graz Faculty of Law, even if only virtually, very much to my regret, because it would have been far more exciting to welcome all of you on site. But I hope that this is something that we can do very soon, circumstances allowing, of course, as one has to add in times such as these. As if this wasn't enough, I come to you today welcoming you on behalf of the faculty as its dean, as a bearer of bad news of some sort, at least, or so I would like to say, because today you are going to talk about a topic that, well, frankly, doesn't exist. Because let's be honest here, there is no such thing as global governance. That is, at least, or so I would say, if we were to think of it in a traditional legal academic sense as a single discipline of a monolithic sort. If we are to approach global governance as a phenomenon in its multifaceted and multidimensional composition, I would like to say, then we would soon have to realize that it is a multi-layered phenomenon that has to be approached from different perspectives, including various disciplines and viewpoints. And so here at the Faculty of Law at University of Graz, we take great pride in the fact that in creating a department dedicated to questions of global governance, we assembled scholars from various walks of academic life in this department, historians, sociologists, and lawyers of various sorts. And all these people together, first and foremost, do splendid work. And I would like to congratulate them on that. And today, they are governance as the multifaceted phenomenon, as the multi-layered phenomenon. It is. This promises to be exciting. It promises to be exciting because all the scholars based here in Graz will share their distinct perspectives and viewpoints, and they invited friends and colleagues from all over the globe to join them in doing so. Brilliant scholars. Oh, Jesus Christ. It seems I'm back, or so it seems to me. I still have to turn on my camera, I suppose. Oh, well, the wonderful walks of the wonders of technological innovation these days. How splendid everything works only 1.5 years into the pandemic. Yeah. So, where was I? Yeah, I was emphasizing how brilliant our scholars are at the Department of Global Governance, and I wanted to congratulate them on successfully inviting so many wonderful scholars from around the globe to join them for today's conference. This promises to be a very exciting event, and I would like to thank them. I would like to thank all of you on behalf of the faculty for making it happen. I would like to thank in particular the scholars at the Global Governance department headed by my dear friend and colleague Jürgen Pirker. I would like to thank Professor Petkova for all the efforts that she put into organizing this, and I would like to thank all the other members of the department for putting in an extra effort to make this happen, even though the circumstances are, of course, somewhat challenging. And I'm very much looking forward to a very exciting day, to a very exciting conference. I will join you again later in the afternoon on screen when chairing the final discussion. For now, I'm very much looking forward to what all of you have to say when it comes to unpacking global governance. And Jürgen, I think before technology will force me out again of this meeting, I will yield the floor to you for your introduction. Thanks so much to everyone. Thanks so much in particular to speakers and to all the participants. Very much looking forward to today's conference, and I'm very excited about all of this.
Thank you very much, Professor Bezemek. And good morning and good afternoon to all of you, I have to say, as our conference spans from the US to China today. And we are honored to welcome you all to the conference. The pandemic, of course, forces us to move the conference into the virtual space, but we will be happy to welcome you in Graz on site in person in the future. And in the meantime, we are glad that technology, at least somehow, as we experienced, enables us a virtual connection that is also symbolized by our logo of the department, our Global Governance Globe. The Department of Global Governance was founded at the Institute of the Foundations of Law at the end of 2020, pooling expertise on law, political, social sciences, humanities, and cultural studies. Our founding symposium bears the title Unpacking Global Governance, Dimensions of Law and Politics in Context. And as it is a founding symposium, please allow me to introduce not only the conference today, but also the work the department has been doing so far and the members of our team. Global governance has become a term frequently used in legal and political contexts. Broadly speaking, it refers to various legal, social, or political instruments of governing, may they be institutionalized or not, and it refers to human social reality on the local, the national, transnational, and international level. Many concepts thus fit under the umbrella of global governance. For us, this term encompasses research, teaching, and practice along the lines of institutional and systemic settings of human and minority rights, of peace building and conflict transition, and legal and political frameworks transcending the state-centric approaches to regional integration and governance. Global governance, as a term initially borrowed from political science, poses challenges for law. Classical notions of global governance, such as the focus on inter- and transnational institutions exercising public power, or the search for a normative justification of a system of global governance through principles of the world community, are challenged and are in flux. Such changes and challenges can, as we believe, only be studied from a multidisciplinary and an interdisciplinary perspective. Challenges, for example, by the populist backlash and the reorientation towards the sovereign nation state, the withdrawal from international organizations, tectonic shifts in the known geopolitical order, the emergence of new players on the world stage, and from an epistemological perspective, maybe also the inadequacy of a Eurocentric, a Western, or even an anthropocentric perspective on global governance. Global governance might be understood as the juridification of globalization, or as we believe, as an approach to tackle problems that arise in global contexts. Within our conference today, the panels will engage with the concept of global governance from three different perspectives. The first panel will address the trends of legal governance, system building in multi-level frameworks, and legitimacy building in context of regional integration in Europe and in Eurasia, by first taking a close look at China's Belt and Road Initiative, taking a look at paradigm shifts in Central Asia, and by asking finally the question for the dawn of a new order. The second panel will address the relationship of state vis-à-vis the individual in contexts of human rights, of migration and cultural pluralism. We will examine the protection of human and minority rights, on the one hand from the perspective of its institutional framework, but on the other hand from the perspective of substantive parameters of justice, by tackling inequality, by analyzing European and EU standards and their relationship to global governance. And the third panel, will focus on peace building and conflict resolution by analyzing concepts of transitional justice, legal mobilization and memorialization, and searching for critical theories for peacekeeping in theory and practice. Two outstanding keynotes will call for systemic reform of global health governance and focus on the role of courts as instruments of local and global governance. These areas and this approach is consistent with the research areas and interests of our department. The Department of Global Governance explores cultural, political, legal challenges underlying processes of Europeanization and globalization. the department embraces a research methodology and framework that is based on the idea of law in context. We focus on three main areas or focal points. The first one being, as you see in the picture, human and minority rights protection through diversity governance. The second one being conflict transitions and peace building. And the third one being legal governance and integration. And as you see, these areas mirror the structure of our conference today. Current projects of the department reflect the team's multidisciplinarity and the transnational approaches. The issues we address are quite diverse. They range from the rule of law crisis in the European Union, questions of disputed statehood or religious diversity, to human and minority rights in a comparative and transnational perspective of constitutional law and politics. I will now just mention a few of the more recent initiatives in order to, by mentioning them, also introduce the team of the Global Governance Department. And of course, this is a kind of an eclectic selection that does not really correspond to the wide scope of activities done by my colleagues, but it should at least allow you a hint on what the department is doing. Professor Bilyana Petkova, who joined us this year, focuses on the effects of digitization in areas ranging from constitutional law to free speech online to data protection, federalism, and urban law. One of her outstanding initiatives in Graz this year was the launch of an international online speaker series on advanced topics of law and technology. Professor Josef Marko, the spiritus rector, so to speak, of our department, is engaged in projects dealing with the resilience of regions in the global pandemic, and on the other hand, focusing on issues of integration and religious diversity in Austria and beyond. Dr. Benedikt Hartzl, in affiliation with the Global Governance Department, recently initiated a joint summer school with the Higher School of Economics that is focusing on Russia and the West and asking the question for cooperation through dialogue, and this is reflecting his research interests on the right to self-determination, de facto states, and EU Eastern Partnership. Dr. Eyal Benvenisti pursues projects dedicated to property rights, but also to synergies of human rights and the rule of law within the European structures of law and governance. Hosting the Austrian Cluster for Conflict, Peace and Democracy, that is a platform connecting the faculty with organizations dealing with conflict resolution, the department is also engaged in interdisciplinary endeavors and practical endeavors such as mediation initiatives at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, training programs for peace-building practitioners from post-conflict areas, empowerment programs for marginalized youth in Austria and beyond, and many others. And all these initiatives are coordinated by Dr. Maximilian Lakic, who is our expert for peace and conflict studies. Responsible for the coordination of the Eastern European and Asian initiatives is Ms. Ksenia Radchenkova, who is also in charge of our on-site organization of the conference. She, and together with Eyal Benvenisti, has organized the conference twice, once as a project that was going to be held on site and the second in the virtual space, so we are very thankful for their efforts. In addition, this semester we are happy to host Professor Mikhail Antonov, who is a senior fellow and is working on issues pointing to the complex interplay between legal scholarship, concepts of sovereignty, and constitutional narratives in Russia. Bilyana Petkova, Benedikt Hartzl, Eyal Benvenisti, and Maximilian Lakic will guide you through the conference, will guide you through the panels as moderators, and they will, of course, enrich the debates as discussants. You will find abstracts of the presentations and CVs of all of the presenters and contributors of the conference on our website. You're very much invited to visit the website also for further information about the department. Finally, let me get back to our global governance emblem, our logo, the global governance globe, and let me use it as a metaphor. The hands symbolize connection. At the moment, it's of course not recommended to shake hands, but the offered hands at least mean that we are looking forward to learning from you, but we will also stretch out our hands in the introduction, the moderation, the comments, and the business lunch tomorrow to hopefully connect our approach with yours. You are invited not only to the opening conference, but you are also invited to future collaborations. Thus, I wish us an exciting conference, many fruitful connections, and gladly hand over the floor to my colleague Bilyana Petkova in London. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So many thanks again to Dean Christoph Bezemek and the team organizing the Global Governance Conference. My name is Bilyana Petkova, and I'm now a professor of law and society in the digital age at the University of Graz. It is a great pleasure to be part of this faculty of law, and my absolute honor to introduce our first keynote of the day, as we are spoiled at Virtual Graz today with two upcoming keynotes. Professor Eyal Benvenisti holds the prestigious Lauterpacht Chair for International Law at the University of Cambridge in the UK. His areas of research and teaching are international law, constitutional law, and administrative law. Professor Benvenisti is the recipient of numerous prizes and was project director for the Global Trust, Sovereigns as Trustees of Humanity research project funded by an European Research Council advanced grant. He's also a co-editor of the British Yearbook of International Law and was on the editorial board of the American Journal of International Law for about an entire decade. Eyal Benvenisti's most recent publications include Between Fragmentation and Democracy, The Role of National and International Courts, that came out with Cambridge University Press, as well as The Law of Global Governance and the collected courses of the Hague Academy of International Law. Last but not least, Eyal was also a global law professor at the New York University Faculty of Law, where I had the pleasure of meeting him years back now. All right, so without further ado, the floor is yours, Eyal. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me. Thanks for inviting me to this wonderful start of this very promising center. Congratulations on the founding of the Institute. You couldn't have chosen a better timing in terms of the need for fresh thinking about global governance, and your approach and your and the composition seem very promising. So I wish you good luck. And good luck for on behalf. I mean, for all of us, that your work will succeed. Let me share my screen, and I hope I can start the presentation. So I hope you can see my screen. I don't see you, but let me know if something doesn't work. So I hope in the half an hour or so that I have explain why I think that the global this pandemic demonstrate the need for better functioning of international organizations, exposes the weaknesses in the law on international organizations or law on global governance. But the pandemic also offers clues as to how to reform this law. And this is where I would like to end my presentation with outlining a systemic reform, or my proposal for a systemic reform in the law on international organizations. As background, we know that the law on IOs is very much permissive. It is based on the idea of functionalism, so that international organization should have the full freedom to operate without any legal impediments. And it begins with the post-war interpretations by the ICJ of the scope of authority of the UN, and this percolates to other IOs. And in the famous reparation for injuries, the court says the UN has a legal personality, and it is relevant also and non-member states who are not party to the UN Charter. And the explanation is a functional explanation without further grounding. To achieve the ends of the UN Charter, the attribution of international personality is indispensable. So whatever organizations need, the law would provide them with. This is the approach of the ICJ, and it has been, I think, convincingly opposed by the minority judge, Judge Christoph, saying that the sense of internations or the UN is an objective fact, but it doesn't mean that that other states who are not members of the organizations are bound to recognize that entity as an international organization or having a legal personality. It's like the metaphor that comes to mind, at least to my mind, is of the Baron von Munchausen, who was able to pull himself and his horse from the mud by pulling his hair. This is the level of the quality of the argument, and as convincing as it is. Now, the outcome of that approach is, I would say, 6 freedoms that IOs have. First of all, they have legal personality that is independent of member states. They're not bound by the member states' obligations. They enjoy broad implied powers to facilitate their work, whatever is necessary, even if it is not mentioned in the constituent documents. They have also freedom to interpret constituent instruments in a way that does not necessarily conform with the Vienna Convention rules on interpretation. Specifically, they are not necessarily bound by the principle of systemic interpretation. They should not be necessarily affected by other treaties. And then subject to a limited set of international law obligations, only whatever is applicable to them, which is a kind of very ambiguous proposition that ICJ adopts. Their immunity from domestic court review, this is based on specific treaties, and some people say it's even based in customary international law. Regardless of the source, they are immune from domestic court review. And ultimately, states are not bound by the acts, are not responsible for the acts or the omissions of the IO, and thereby they can launder their responsibility by transforming the activity to the IO. Very permissive approach, and it's all based on 3 tragic misconceptions. The one is that international organizations are inherently good. They are wonderful. If state parties get together and form an organization, by definition, that is good, and the law should not burden them. Secondly, the diversity of organization, what we call fragmentation, is a sign of maturity, of progress, of expertise. And so we should be, proud that in our universe, there are so many international organizations. And thirdly, there's also relation theory here that states that organizations are wonderful because they, by the very fact that they exist, they resolve interstate collection problems, they provide more information to the parties, they allow actors to get together, forming epistemic communities, and thereby overcoming differences. And so why should the law, why should judges, why should national court judges get in the way of such a wonderful achievement of humanity? In reality, however, we know that IOs are the simple extension of international and domestic politics, and specifically special interests like insurers, pharmaceutical companies, tobacco companies. They thrive through influencing international organizations. Secondly, fragmentation is a hegemonic instrument. It's a way for the powerful states who can set up and exit organizations to move from one to another and to divide and rule the lesser powers who are members or who are not members of organizations. And lastly, IOs may be necessary to resolve interstate collective action problems, but their very existence is not sufficient for overcoming collective action. IOs need specific tools for monitoring, for enforcement, etc., to secure compliance, and so to resolve collective action problems. I want to demonstrate these arguments or these findings through looking into the WHO and the COVID pandemic. So the WHO is based on an optimistic premise that that it is a body that is apolitical, science-based, and it sets to resolve coordination problems. So we need somebody to tell us what to do, and this will be answered by scientific dispute. So we know it from the preamble that WHO Constitution is designed for the attainment by all peoples of the highest possible level of health, and that unequal development is a common danger. So we are all together in one boat, so to speak. And the personnel of the WHO are all technicians, so experts chosen from among the persons most qualified by their technical competence in the field of health. No politics. The assembly sets standards by 2/3 majority members acting and voting, binding all state parties without ratification unless they formally opt out, and there are no provisions for exiting the WHO constitution. Why should states bother to exit a constitution that provides progress for all? So these are the premises, and they are very much reflect the premises that we see in general with respect to IOs. But can we really support these premises? In reality, and as we know now, health is a matter of political coordination and cooperation. There is politics. From the outset, science was conceived as Western. So the British epidemiologist Mackenzie, in a lecture in New York, said, in practice, it is impossible to expect developed countries to be overruled by the votes of nations less developed from a medical and social point of view. So the more developed countries will produce science, and everybody will have to adjust and accept because science. And this has been demonstrated that coordination is not only a matter of science, where in the 60s, the USSR demanded that the link between working condition and health be recognized. It's not only vaccines and medicines. It's also socioeconomic situation. This was not accepted by WHO. In the 60s and 70s, family planning was suddenly a matter of health because the West was concerned about poor people becoming communist. And from 2006 and onwards, we see the rise of the Asian and African states. Indonesia refusing to share the DNA of a new virus, claiming ownership over a national resource. So this is only with respect to coordination, but also there are problems of cooperation when we have nothing, when we don't have enough vaccines, when the question is how to allocate health risks, given the fact that some countries are more bear the burden of risk more than others. So, in other words, global health governance poses a series of fundamental coordination and cooperation problems, and the WHO is not fit to deal with either of them because it's based on the wrong premises. And when the WHO wanted to effectively respond to a previous pandemic, this is the case of the SARS pandemic 2002-2003, the Director General then, Gro Harlem Brundtland, was extremely resourceful in adjusting her role so that the WHO is able to respond effectively to all these different means. The outcome was 3 years later, the international health regulations that made sure that no subsequent Director General will be able to replicate what Gro Harlem Brundtland did, because the international health regulations do not provide the Director General with any tools to effectively respond to pandemic, and the regulations ensure that states retain all the necessary responsibilities, including information. So when the World Health Assembly decided in beginning of this month to establish a non-governmental negotiation body to strengthen pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response through drafting a new convention, the question is whether that would work. And would a new convention suffice? And the point I want to make today is that a new convention might work on only part of the problem, and it will not suffice because the problem of health is much beyond the capacity of the WHO, and there is a need of more systemic response to the problems of health and others, problems related to health. Let me focus on the problem of cooperation, on global health governance and the challenge of cooperation. Can we really say that international organizations are inherently well suited to promote cooperation? There is a famous book by Robert Cohen, After Hegemony, 1984. And there is a reference to the fact that even rational actors, rational egoists, can overcome collective action problem through international organizations. And why? Because international organizations reduce asymmetries of information and thereby reducing uncertainty. So we know what parties are doing, and we know that we can trust or mistrust them. And if we know what others are doing, then we will benefit from the commitment to cooperation that can be exchanged. But the problem is that we need in each and every area to understand the actual collective problem that exists, that rises within each and every context. There are various collective action problems. Some are easier to resolve than others. The question is, how do we understand the challenge of global health governance? And in order to understand the problem of global health governance, I want to discuss it in the context of another famous example of collective action, a successful one, the trench warfare in First World War. And this is based on a book by Axelrod, The Evolution of Cooperation, another very influential book at the time. And this is the idea that during the trench warfare, British and German soldiers were able to endogenously develop fruitful cooperation by promising to each other that they will miss when they bomb each other's trenches. They will make sure that they miss rather than aim and kill the opponents. So it was kind of a stable live and let live equilibrium. No external institutions and no enforcement mechanism except for the reciprocal tit for tat. And it worked. You can see them celebrating Christmas together. How global health governance differs, why global health governance differs from this stable equilibrium of tit for tat among parties fighting each other. Let's look at the factors that shape the evolution of cooperation during the trench warfare. Both parties are similarly vulnerable. Both parties know who is responsible. If somebody does not miss, we know that they do not want to cooperate. The frequency is very clear. There's immediate response, immediate tit for tat. There's no time to wait. And the scope is very simple. Only there's one topic in which parties cooperate. It's only about shooting each other. Finally, no outsiders involved. It's only the parties, the two parties, one against the other, one pitted against the other. Only two of them, and so their interests are similar. Right? What about health? How different global health governance is from trench warfare? Very different. This is my point. Very, very different. If we look at the causes of health risks, we know most of them are human-made, if not all of them, and are mainly based on changes in land use and agricultural industry changes, international travel commons, and you see the different causes. But you see, there are different causes, and some of them are based on in specific areas. So, for example, the land use changes, most of them are located in the south. Loss of wildlife and diversity due to deforestation in the areas in the southern hemisphere. This is where zoonotic hotspots emerge. But if we look at the problem widely, deforestation, which is a significant threat to biodiversity, is actually accelerated by global demand for commodities. So who is responsible for deforestation? The South? Or is it the demand from countries like France, Germany, Italy, the UK, the USA? You see the demand, the US demand that leads to deforestation is almost the same as Brazil's, right? So it's not only the South that is responsible; it's the entire humanity that is responsible for that. And also in terms of health risk, there's unequal sharing of the benefits. So it's not a simple tit for tat that we have. What we have is actually a vicious circle that begins with increased consumption, increased demand in the north, that leads to further deforestation in the south, leads to increased zoonotic diseases in the south, and failure to comply with expectation to respond to alert and to share data, which lead to the North's reaction of preemptive closing of borders, preventing access to vaccine, and the South reaction is refusal to share data and to report on epidemics. If the North will, what we will do, if the North will only close borders, why should we provide them with information? So cooperation breaks down before it even started. So if we identify the difference between trench warfare and global health governance, we see that vulnerability is different, dissimilar. It's very difficult to find who's responsible and to identify causality. Frequency is not as frequent as trench warfare. It could be very intermittent. I mean, before the pandemic, the expectation was that pandemic will appear every generation, not before. So what you do now will not count in the future, and there's no immediate tit for tat. And the scope is much more expensive. There's not a single issue that like shooting that counts, and a number of activities and factors that shape global health governance. And finally, very many special interests are involved. Pharmaceutical companies, tobacco companies, baby formula producers, all sorts of actors, investors that whose interests may differ from the interests of the wider constituencies. So how can IOs overcome problems of asymmetry, asymmetric information, intermittence in exchanges, multiplicity of factors, and special interests? Now, I don't know how much time do I have, but I'll be very brief and say that the goal, I would say, is to construct a virtuous circle that will begin with more limited consumption in the north, that would secure sustainable management of resources in the south, with improved preparedness for the zoonotic diseases, reporting obligations, protection of whistleblowers, and reliance on artificial intelligence that will provide information in time, not before, not too late, and improved global emergency reactions, regulating reactions to epidemic, improved access to drugs and vaccines that will assist, that will be assisted by the by northern states. So instead of a simple tit for tat between two actors, we have a number of functions operating that could operate simultaneously if you think about the broader picture. And for that, we can't have a simple mechanism of exchanging information between simply two or a number of actors. We need much more cohesive regulation and attention. So immediate metaphor was a kind of traffic control tower in an airport that manages hundreds of planes in the air. But what we have is actually a almost infinite number of international organizations and other organizations that have different parts, are responsible for separate parts of this big picture or the big puzzle. In the area of health itself, Hoffman and Cole found more than 200 actors, including international organizations that are relevant for resolving simply health problems. So what does it tell us about the ability to find a way to manage this entire activity in a sensible and sustainable, effective way? I don't have time to go through all the different mechanisms, but I just want to address each of the five or the component. How to make sure that parties regard themselves as equally vulnerable, like in the trench warfare. Maybe by adding different aspects, integrating different aspects of the problem together. So enlarging the scope of WHO to include also food regulation, trade in wildlife, etc. Or by creating greater inter-IO coordination. How to overcome problems of attribution, causality, by providing for more scientific cooperation. This is not a problem, but it is a problem to ensure that there is sufficient exchange of information. So the reporting obligations, protection of whistleblowers, access to data, commissions of inquiry, and AI, because we now have tools to ensure that information can be gleaned from transactions or and information that passes through the internet. So protection of cyberspace and allowing free access to social network data. Frequency. Overcoming problem of intermittent exchanges could be through breaking down interaction to smaller steps, timely reporting, periodic contributions to AO, ongoing inclusive management, and then managing the complexity of health issues through increasing inter-IO coordination and cooperation on health and related matters, regulating trade in risky products, enforcing reporting obligations, and curbing excessive responses to outbreaks. Now, and of course, in terms of special interests, we already have tools that at least we know what to do to curb the ability of special interests to have their say in international organizations. All this boils down, I think, to two areas where law could be helpful. First of all, in improving intra-IO collaboration, and secondly, promoting inter-IO collaboration. And ultimately, the idea would be to regard international organizations as not as angels that came from heaven to help us, but as human-made institutions that are subject to human fallibilities, and as in any other area of governance, we need law to regulate both the internal relations within the organization and the external relations of the organization. I think that the latter part, so enhancing the relationship of international organization with others, is probably the even more important aspect of global governance in the future. So I will stop now and get your questions. Thank you very much.
Many thanks again, Eyal. It is, of course, healthcare is not an area that I have looked into, but it is, of course, the issue of today, I think. So if there are any questions from the faculty, please feel free. Perhaps one more question we could take, and I know that we are already perhaps ahead of time.
Thank you very much, Bilyana, for your wonderful discussion. And there's a question in the chat already from our colleague Magdalena Nemeth. Maybe Professor Benvenisti, you want to respond?
I don't see the chat, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the question goes to your presentation mentioned AI could be used to assist to lower barriers in scientific reporting. Our colleague asks whether you would like to elaborate on this further, and whether you would also see a potential danger in artificial intelligence and the expanded use of artificial intelligence in this context.
Yes, thank you. So according to the international health regulations, the WHO may not act upon information that is not provided by the state. But actually, the WHO was prevented from acting on the information it already had in December 2019, because China did not divulge that information. Now, in December 2019, there was already information about a pandemic stemming from Wuhan. There was a company called Blue Dot, based in Toronto, that sifted through social media and could trace two things. First, it could trace that people became sick in Wuhan, and secondly, people who bought tickets, airline tickets, to different places in the world would bring the epidemic to other countries and becoming a pandemic. So Blue Dot was able to trace crucial weeks before the WHO that there's a pandemic going on. Now, this is through AI, and Blue Dot, as a private company, could assess the information and share it with its customers. Now, in the future, this would be a necessary component for any global governance that is effective. AI would be the first fire alarm of the existence of a threat and also for the spread of the disease. Now, if states are bound, or if the WHO continues to be bound by information that governments provide it will not have the ability to respond in time. And so AI is crucial, and therefore access to social media continues to be crucial and will be indispensable part of any regime that governs health. So this is my, very brief response.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see another panel, maybe, or a separate conference on healthcare, privacy, and AI. But now I'm getting greedy. So over to Jürgen. Thanks very much, Eyal. If we could have a virtual applause, it would be definitely a very, very large one. So thanks again very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We still have one question from the panel, one final question, if you allow it, Professor Benvenisti. I hand over to Eistimmetskomite.
Thank you very much, Jürgen, and thank you, Bilyana. I will not take too much time. Thank you very much, Professor Benvenisti, for this very thought-provoking presentation. I know that it's usually said after a presentation, but it really did challenge a lot of preconceptions that I've also had, especially coming from an EU background. We do take it for granted that international organizations are good, right? So on that note, just two very brief questions for you. What do you think, why do the states still bother to work towards some global governance, or why do they still continue to try and create such structures if, as you so interestingly outlined, do not really work, but maybe even make things more complex? So why do you think so? And the second question, what do you think, could we argue to some extent that one of the underlying problems as to why these organizations do not work as we wish they did is the lack of basic consensus, perhaps on the common basic values or principles, or on the very basic common objectives? Like if we, as you mentioned so interestingly, that the WHO is based on a Western concept of health, for instance. Do you think it could play a role? Thank you very much.
Thank you. These are difficult questions, very important ones. The first one, I think, at least two reasons. One, I think states or governments still think that they have to try. This is their responsibility to their constituencies, to their citizens, and to the world, to try to make things better, to improve things, to make the system effective. And maybe another response is that governments realize that global health governance will emerge with them or without them. There is already private initiatives to regulate health, initiatives led by insurers and reinsurer companies working with AI companies, trying to identify areas of larger risk in order to ensure that, for example, there's ample insurance for risky investments. And so if there is already regulation going on, it shouldn't be left for the private sector only. Maybe this is a second explanation. But I think that the initiative behind the new WHO treaty essentially comes from people who have good intentions. I think that the founding of the WHO at the time, 1946, 1948, was motivated by people with good intentions. So there is still hope, and there is still an effort that needs to be taken. Now, your question about lack of basis concern, I think it's important to differentiate here between health and climate. In the context of climate, we can say, well, nobody. It's not. You can't really say about climate that everybody will be equally affected. There are some regions that will be not as severely affected as others. So, and some countries might even benefit from warmer weather. So not everybody is on board and equally committed to regulating or to preventing change. In terms of health, however, I think it's much clearer that everybody is affected. And so there's even more promise of accepting the commitment to cooperate among states in the health area, even more than in the climate sphere. The problem, as I think, it's not that people are concerned, people are not affected. It's that people feel that it's not clear that if they commit, others will commit as well. So we need to make sure that the commitment are, interlinked in a clear way, to convince parties to take up the challenge and to join the regime, and that's the challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Benvenisti, for reminding us to always be suspicious if someone has good intentions. And thank you for guiding us to our tasks for the law to kind of come up with inter-IO collaboration and instruments for intra-IO collaboration, as well as probably control of IOs and what they are doing to prevent some form of expertocracy, even in light of a kind of a Western dominance in this expertocracy. This all leads to challenge for system buildings, and this leads us to the second panel, or the first panel of the conference, and I will now hand over to my colleague Benedikt Hatzel.